Yeah,
This will
mini
be.
indeed.
This is, I have a very precarious setup. My camera's in my spice rack. Like, I don't know how it's going to hold.
Yeah.
My laptop, my notes are here. So if I look down, that's why. But
Cool.
I'm excited.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. And thanks so much if you're a new follower or you've been following us a while. Just thanks so much for the support and interest. And thanks for being here for our first live. I'm going to keep it short because we don't have a lot of time, a ton of time. I believe the cutoff is 1 hour. So I'll just introduce Jasmin, who most of you probably already know. And yeah, I mean, other than that, just wanted to thank you guys for being here. And I guess we'll just go from there. Oh, and if you guys could hold off on your questions for Jasmin until after around the 30-minute mark. I mean, we'll make it obvious when that is. That would be great. Much appreciated. Thank you. Over to you, Jasmin.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to take about 30 minutes to talk about directing non-union and inexperienced actors. But if there's any pressing questions, I feel like Lily, you can, if you want to jump in, you can, but I'm going to try and cover a lot of ground in 30 minutes. It's going to be difficult, but then after we have about 30 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So we'll start there. Like I said, this is not necessarily focusing on ACTRA or union actors so much, because I have only worked with ACTRA and union actors when I direct TV. And that's a different experience, and I enjoy that too. But for the most part, I've directed non-union, non-actors, and inexperienced actors. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on in this class. And I think that's what most people, if you're directing your shorts, if you just graduated film school, if you're doing your first feature, those are sorts of that's kind of who you're going to be working with. And that's a different experience than working with people who have been to theater school or, that sort of thing. And you can get really good performances from inexperienced actors. It's just a different process. So that's what I'm going to focus on here today. Like I said, I have notes on my laptop here. So if I look down, it's because I'm looking at those. But there are many ways to direct. This is just the style that's worked for me. It's something I've developed over about 7 or 8 years since film school. I didn't direct like this in film school. I learned it after. But I encourage everybody to develop their own directing style. This is just what works for me. And for me, when I'm directing actors, the performance that I'm looking for is a type of naturalistic acting, meaning that I want actors to sound and behave like we do in real life. And that's the style that I'm looking for, as opposed to something you might see in a Wes Anderson film or a Yorgos Lanthimos film. That's a type of stylized acting, which is cool too. It's just not the style that I'm doing. So I'm not going to cover that here. And I also want to say that directing starts with a good script. You can't get you can't get a good performance from a bad script. So if you're your own writer and director, you're going to put the most time you're going to put is into your script before you even get to this part. So I just wanted to say that, like, you can do all these techniques, but if you have a bad script, you're not going to get far. And I also wanted to say that because this talk and this class is really aimed at female filmmakers of color and beyond, we, as I think sort of emerging filmmakers, or if marginalized filmmakers, if you want to look at it that way, we can start to question the methods that have been used in the past in terms of casting, in terms of rehearsal, and start to sort of break down maybe the systems that have been in place for so long, because those work for some projects, but they don't work for every project. And I think that we are breaking down a lot of barriers, and we can do that in the casting and rehearsal process and the directing process too. So that's something that, as I was preparing for this, I realized there's some more out of the box, I think, thinking when it comes to that. Expectations for your film are super important before you even start to direct anybody, before you even cast your film. You have to be realistic with your expectations, meaning that if the types of performances you're looking for are going to be hard to achieve sometimes with people who are not experienced. So what you really need is time, because you don't have the budget, you don't have the money. what do you have? You have time, and you really need to make that space in your life to practice with your actors, your DP. You need the time, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so with Firecrackers, I wrote a script that it's incredibly difficult for any actor to do some of these scenes. Super heavy, emotional, risky scenes. For any actor, that's going to be difficult. For non-union, inexperienced actors, for people who've barely acted before, that's so hard. So with Firecrackers, I cast the lead girls a year before we even went to camera, and the supporting roles 3 to 4 months before going to camera. So that's just something to keep in mind with your script. And when I was doing shorts, I would say I cast I started rehearsing with them a month before we went to cameras, just to give people context. You have to understand that you're going to have to be patient with your actors. If they haven't done anything before, you almost become a little bit like an acting coach too. So you wear many hats, and I think that's something that you have to understand, that be prepared for that. I get so many questions, and the producers of Firecrackers get so many questions about casting. How did we cast the film? And the casting process is something that I developed on a short film. So just to give people context, I did a short film called Firecrackers while I was in film school in 2013. And the way I cast that and the way I directed that and the way I rehearsed that is so vastly different than what you see in the feature. I did a short film after film school called Wave, and that's where I developed this sort of style of directing and casting and rehearsing that I used on my feature film. And I did that in 2014. So the typical casting process, if people aren't familiar with it, is that you would hire a casting director, usually very expensive, and they will send out sides, which are pieces of your script or scenes from your script, to actors. And those actors will get on camera or come in, and for about 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, they will do the scene for you. And then you see a bunch of people, and it's just kind of like clockwork. You're just seeing a bunch of people. And I've done that too. I've done that casting process. I think it works well with people who are experienced because they know how to come in, do the scene, and walk out. For me, with non-union actors or inexperienced actors or non-actors, that's setting them up to fail, in my opinion, because it's already so intimidating for them to come into a room when they've barely done it before. But everybody's nervous. Like, I want them to succeed. The producer wants them to succeed. It's a very nerve-wracking experience. So the casting process we developed is different than that traditional way. And I think that could be useful for people to know if they're starting to think about casting their shorts or casting their features. So the way it went, well, before I even get into that, I want to say, like, the casting process for me can be used not just to pick your actors, but it's a way of building the character with the actors. It's a way, as soon as I cast somebody, they're building and shaping the character with me from the moment they're cast through principal photography. They're creating the character from the moment that they submit their tape, because all the auditions that I've asked them to do are all improvised. They never get the script until after they're cast. So every time they're auditioning, it's all improvised. And what happens is we will post ads on like Mandy.com, which is a non-union acting casting site, or Craigslist, or some other non-union sites. With Firecrackers, we did Facebook ads and Instagram ads. And you'll get a bunch of submissions, and then they would fill out a Google form. And from the Google form, we would ask them to go on tape and do a scene. And the scene was like, I'd email them a page that said, this is your character bio. This is the context of the monologue you're going to do. You're going to improvise. And record a 5-minute improv of this. It doesn't have to be perfect, but basically what you're trying to look for is, can these non-experienced actors make choices? Do they have the confidence to make choices, to take risks? And from there, we narrowed it down for the girls, for Lou and Chantel, for example. We only saw about 5 girls for both roles, 5 all told, in person. And the each individual audition was 40 minutes each. And that's pretty typical. I even just did that on my the music videos I just did. I wouldn't say they're 40 minutes each, but they're longer than the standard audition of come in, say your lines, leave. The auditions for Firecrackers were like almost an hour long. And what is expected of the actors, they'll come in and do an improvised scene with me instead of a reader. And that's really exhausting as a director, I have to say, like to be in scenes all day, it takes a lot out of you. But the reason why I do it that way is because I wrote the characters. So I know where to take the scene. I know if I want to create more conflict, I know where to go in my mind, rather than putting that on a reader who doesn't know the characters. So I will improvise in a scene with the actors. And that's how we cast Lou and Sean. That's how we cast Michaela and Karina in Firecrackers. And then from there, once they were hired for the job, I bring Karina and Michaela in to improvise with other actors for other roles. So Karina and Michaela were working on their characters through that process too. And I would involve them in the casting process. So I would say, like, to Karina, who plays Chantel, we cast a bunch of Kyles who play her boyfriend in the film. And I said, what did you think about this guy? Did he make you feel comfortable? Were you okay with him? How was that? So they were a part of the casting process for the other characters in the film as well. The other thing about that is, because you don't have a lot of money when you're doing like your shorts and that sort of thing, it's good to kind of do a lot of the work, to front load the work. So see tapes, narrow it down before you see people in person, because you don't have the money to have a casting facility for like 4 days. It's very expensive. What else was I going to say? Okay, so that's like the casting process. If people have other questions about that, we can talk about it after. I'm going to move on to rehearsals, which are such a big, huge part of Firecrackers and my short films before. With actors, you have to pay them for rehearsal time. So it's something to keep in mind. If you want to use actors, you'll just have to be paying. It'll take a big chunk of your budget. If that's what you feel is important for your film, by all means do it. For us, we couldn't manage that. But that's not the only reason why I chose to go non-union. But anyway, the rehearsals for me are not rehearsals so much as they're workshops, because they're not, again, we're not working with the script. We don't work with the script until we're very close to shooting. So the idea for me with rehearsals, with workshops, is to build a shared history between characters and to build chemistry. And that takes time. And you have to kind of move slowly with it. So like, for instance, with Firecrackers, it's the same thing. Like, I have books filled with scenes that don't exist in the film. I had to write an entire year's worth of history for all the characters of what happened 2 years before this film started, what happened 2 months before the film started, a week before. And that's where the workshops are taking place, in the history that exists before your film begins. So that you're building an alternate reality for the actors. So in their mind, they've lived those memories. So when we get to set and you're doing a scene like between Lou and her mom, for instance, like Lou, the character of Lou and her mom have a very, not a great relationship, right? So I could at least say to Michaela, if we got stuck, especially if we got stuck, I would say, remember that improv we did where your mom said this to you? I'd be like, how did that make you feel? And it's good to ask actors questions as opposed to telling them how their character feels. So say, you might be like, how did that make you feel? And she'd be like, well, I don't know if I can swear on here.
Yeah. So?
Okay.
I guess we'll see.
I fucking hate her. Yeah. She'd just be like, I fucking hate my mom. She made me feel like shit. And I'd be like, well, that's what's happening now. How does this make you feel now? And she'd be like, it makes me feel like back in that time, when she was saying this to me, I don't believe her anymore. I'm like, great, use that. And then you have something to build off of if you have the history, if you've lived it. So with the workshops, it's the same thing. Like, I would write up one sheet of or one page of like, here's the context of the improv. and both actors would get that, or all actors would get that. Then each individual actor would get specifics for their character. So like Lou might get one write-up that Chantel would never know about, and vice versa. Because I think it's really important to direct actors separately as much as possible. Because we don't know what each other is thinking. So why would I say, you know, why would I be yelling from Video Village? You all feel really bad about this. They don't all feel the same way, right? So it's like you have to kind of take each actor aside and say, you know, come here, let's talk about what your character is going through. Let's talk about, and it's really time consuming. And I feel bad for, if any of the actors are watching, they're probably rolling their eyes, because they will remember me being in the rehearsals 30 minutes with one actor and they're sitting outside waiting, or like looking at their notes, or like listening to music, because I needed that time with each actor alone.
Yeah.
And what happens when you do that is something really interesting, because you go into a scene and for instance, you might start light. And I say start light being, start with the happy times in the characters' lives. Don't start with the tough times. Start with the happy times. So like Lou and Chantel, when Karina and Michaela were working together in the very beginning, it's like, let's do like, you're getting ready to go out and hang with the boys. So it's like, let's talk about boys, let's talk about sex, let's talk about school or whatever. And it's like, I didn't tell them what to say, really. I just said, you're getting ready. Here's the pieces of makeup you're going to use. Here's the mirror. And then they just started talking. Then I'd be like, hey, cut. I could take them away separately. And then you add a little piece of conflict. So you start planting the seeds. So I would tell, like, maybe Chantel would be like, okay, you saw something on Lou's phone yesterday. You saw somebody text her that she told you she doesn't talk to anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you do the scene again. But what happens is that actor's coming in feeling a little different. And then the other actor, if they're listening, they'll pick up on that. And then you start to create these like little nuggets of conflict that carry through right until you're shooting. And it just adds depth. It adds layers. It adds some like a richness to the characters, right? Mm-hmm. Another example that I think is fun, I wish I could show people these rehearsals because they were really amazing to watch, is like Lou, her mom, and her little brother. Again, in the film, their relationship isn't good. But they did have happy times, right? They did before this film started. So it was really important for me to do an improv with them, a workshop, where they were having a happy time as a family. So I did this improv with the little boy, his name's Callum, who played Jesse. Mm-hmm. He was like 11, and then Lou, and then the mom. And I said, you two are trying to cheer your mom up. She's in a bad mood. That's it. That was the improv. But I knew that Tamara, who played Lou's mom, in real life, she really loved The Cure. She was obsessed with The Cure. So in the scene, and I didn't tell her this, I said, you know, like, the kids, you guys go and like try to cheer your mom up. And if she doesn't come up off the couch, use my phone and put on The Cure. I forget what song it was. And they did that. And she just like was so emotional because of that. And they all danced in the living room together. And it's those unexpected things that are going to start giving confidence to the actors, because the actors are going to feel like, wow, I feel like I'm acting. I'm just saying that as people who haven't done it a lot before. They're going to start to feel like, I'm making choices. This feels real to me. And that's a confidence that you want to instill in them. The other thing I would say is bring your DP, your cinematographer in to start filming the rehearsals at some point. Not at the beginning, but at some point start introducing the cinematographer into the rehearsal process. Catherine Lutz, who shot Firecrackers, started to come in. And what that does is it builds a trust between the non-union actors, the inexperienced actors, and a camera person, which they may have not had a lot of experience with at all, right? So it's like you want to bring in your camera person, and I really suggest you film the rehearsals in the style that your film is going to be shot in. So like Firecrackers is shot super immersive. The camera's close to the actors most of the time, and it's super mobile. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make sense if that's the way your film is supposed to look stylistically, it doesn't make sense to put your film or your camera on a tripod and film the rehearsal, because you're not going to understand the emotional impact of being that close to a person. So I just wanted to say, try to film it in the same style. Try to film your rehearsals in the same style. Closer to shooting, I would say that's when you can introduce the script. When the actors feel like they have enough confidence and chemistry with the other actors that they can work with the script. But don't work with the script too much, because it's going to feel stale if you overdo it. The other important thing to do, like closer to shooting, is to figure out blocking when it comes to like scenes with 4 or more actors. You don't want to really leave that up to chance on the day, even if you're not in the same space. So like some of my favorite scenes in Firecrackers are the ones with like 6 people, 8 people in it, because I feel like it was so interesting to figure out blocking and motivations for the blocking, and to make it feel natural, because it takes a lot of work to make that feel natural if like there's several things going on. So figure that out, but closer to shooting. I will say, like, all of this process, in my experience, these actors who haven't done much before have told me they feel so gratified by the experience of doing it this way, because it feels empowering to them. And I think that's the thing you always want to keep in mind as a director, is you're there to empower actors and your crew. You're not there to be an authoritarian leader. You're there to be a collaborator. So that to me was really nice to hear. I also wanted to touch on sexual scenes or intimate scenes, because Firecrackers has a few of those, and pretty much every short film I do has some intimate scenes in it. And this is something to be really mindful of when you're working with new actors who have never done intimate scenes before. Now you can hire intimacy coordinators, which is really good. And I encourage everybody to hire an intimacy coordinator. But even if you have an intimacy coordinator, it's still up to you as a director to be the one that makes everybody feel comfortable. You cannot be second guessing yourself in those moments. You have to be confident going into directing those scenes. And so what I did for Firecrackers was, first you start by just having a conversation with the actors who are involved in the sexual scene or the intimate scene, and just have a conversation for like 45 minutes and like air out everybody's grievances, everybody's anxieties, like lay it out all on the table. And then what I did for Firecrackers with Michaela and David, who plays Johnny, the mom's boyfriend, we did a Meisner exercise. And I encourage people to look up this exercise, because it's just about breaking down people's walls. And it's just, I don't know what it's called, but if you look up Meisner exercise, you'll find it. It's very common acting exercise where you just repeat what you see in the other actor. And it's just about being vulnerable, and there's no touching. It's just verbal. So we did that in our like dorm rooms where we were staying the day before or something. We did that scene. And then from there, when you do the blocking's so important. That is not a time where you want to like improvise. So we did blocking on the day, and you want to allow for like lots of time on a closed set to do the blocking. And the blocking is super mechanical. It's like, you're going to put your hand here. You can touch me here, but not here. I'm okay with this. I'm comfortable with this. So you're putting everything out on the table, and you're mapping it out. And I would say you only do the actual scene full on when you're doing the take. Don't do it, but don't rehearse like the kissing and stuff, because a lot of people, like, you don't want to force people to be making out and like sexual with a stranger, you know, like save it for the take so you can do as few, so you have to put them, they don't have to go through that as much as they would if they were doing like a traditional scene. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Fascinating.
Shooting, it's just very brief. Like, if you do all that work, when you get to set, you should feel really prepared. You should feel good. Usually most people do, but again, if you're non-union actors, non-actors, they leave the cocoon of the rehearsal space, and now all of a sudden they're on set, especially with a feature, and there's all these like people they don't know.
Yeah.
There's like all these camera crews, there's all these lights. It's like super intimidating.
Yeah.
So again, you have to be their friend, you have to be their counselor, you're their acting coach, you're there to support them, and you check in with them, make sure that they're okay. I think this is not really the time to do improv. I think that the improv is the stuff you do before you do it in the rehearsal. That will just eat up so much time on the day, unless, you know, I know there are films that do a lot of improv takes, but usually they have a lot of money, you know? And if you don't have money, it's not really the time to be doing a lot of improv on the day. However, with Firecrackers, an interesting thing happened. I would usually do like 4 or 5 takes scripted, and then I would say, okay, we're gonna do our improv take now. And the actors would all be like, yay, improv take. And then they would just do the lines, but they would do the lines a little bit looser, a little bit more naturalistic. And it was some weird like reverse psychology thing happening there. I think they just felt like they had the freedom, but they were still using the lines, and a lot of those takes ended up in the film. So that was really interesting. But the script is your Bible at the end of the day. So that's like, I think I just breezed through a lot of stuff and rambled through. Before we go to questions, I wanted to just leave people with some recommendations. A lot of what I've talked about today, I learned in film school and after, but a lot of it, like the seeds were planted in film school because we had a directing class at Ryerson. There was just an acting class basically for a year. So I was acting in other people's scenes. And I encourage, if you're a director and you've never acted before, you should try taking some acting classes, or being your friends, just do it with your friends. Or I took improv classes when I was writing Firecrackers. It was more comedic, but it was still valuable. So I think everybody should act if you're going to direct. Also, I have this book I got in film school. I didn't even use it in film school. I used it after. It's called Directing Actors by Judith Weston. like a YouTube beauty person. But yeah, it's called Directing Actors, and it's really good. It's going to cover everything like I talked about today, but even in more depth, and it's going to give a lot more detail. And I used it, I read it front to back before I went and did Firecrackers, before I started doing rehearsals or anything. So people should, if you want a good book, I recommend that book. And the last thing I'm going to say is that working with low budgets can really feel, I think a lot of people think it feels restricting and limiting and frustrating. But I can say, just from being on the other side of it, from having directed TV or looking at doing other people's scripts or bigger budgets, this is the time where you're going to have the most creative freedom. You'll never have this creative freedom again, the more you ascend in your career. So now is the time to develop that acting style, to take risks, to be experimental, and to try out all these different things when you're casting and directing. And develop your style now, because later you won't have the time that you do now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's did I make it? 7:30 on the dot.
Good job. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Cheers. Fantastic. I noticed Michaela and someone was asking about